Hello everyone, this is Defense Politics Asia, and this is the summary for the day of 530 for the 7th of August. And let's start off with the southern front. We have nothing over at the southern front. And I'm moving into the Zaporizhzhia front. So this is Zaporizhzhia city, and over at the Zaporizhzhia front, we have nothing over at the Kupiansk sector. The action continues over at the Orikhiv sector, with the Ukrainians continue their attack against Robotine. And this time around, they attack also towards Verbove. Verbove is actually here. They were attacking towards Verbove and also towards Robotine. Fighting is reported by the Russian Defense Ministry about the fighting at Robotine. They always mention this Uspenovka, but actually I cannot find this place anywhere near the front line. Uspenovka is actually further behind, which is kind of out of place. So not too sure why exactly that. I actually went through multiple maps, different maps like Yandex, and I cannot find it. So and then the Russians also were reportedly having offensive operation. This is according to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. I'm not so. My feeling is that it is the Ukrainians that is actually on the offensive. So I'm not sure about this reports about the Russians. Maybe the Russians did some counter-offensive actions that we are not seeing. And then there is also, according to Deep State UA, reporting that the fighting was towards near Verbove, and this looks like a fight towards Verbove along the road. There's actually this road here that the Ukrainians are actually trying to fight along the road. And according to Deep State UA, they also kind of remind their followers that the situation is actually very dynamic, and that the situation can be in the morning they captured a certain trench line, and then by the afternoon it will be recaptured by the Russians. So a situation is extremely volatile, and so they just try to tell people that do not take any information as concrete, because things change really fast. And this is actually reflected by RIBA's information in today's report. Their 11 a.m. report in today, just only not too long ago, they mentioned that the 160 and 180 Mechanized Brigade of the 10th Army Corps attacked the Robotine Verbove line, and then these are infantry attacks without armored support, and then this attack failed. But in the morning, the Ukrainians tried again, and this time around with artillery support with the forces of the 15th Brigade. So they actually sent a different force now. So this is deliberately trying to tire out the Russians. So they first sent a force to attack first. They deprived the Russians of the sleep. In the morning, they sent another force to attack. And apparently, I think this is probably just as good, because it's the National Guard. I think it might be a stronger force. I'm not sure. So regardless, it is the sleep deprived Russian forces are now having to deal with yet another attack, and as such, the Ukrainians are actually successful. They actually managed to occupy the northern outskirts of Robotine. However, the Russians counterattack and managed to recapture the lost position. The fighting is still ongoing, and I find this to be very interesting that the Ukrainians are using rolling attacks. Different units taking different timing to attack, to deprive the defenders of rest and exhaust their ammunition, exhaust their energy. And this seems to be successful, which means the Russians will have to react in the same way in order to survive future Ukrainian attacks. There is also this is actually outdated. This is 6th of August. Yeah, so there is also information about some fighting reported at Bilohaya. According to the Russian sources, RIBA, they say that there is some kind of positional fighting over here at Bilohaya. Positional means that they are not really pushing. They are just firing in position, very tactical. So not exactly offensive operation. Reinforcement was reported at Orikhiv, according to RIBA in the same today's report, the 11 a.m. report. They say that the formation of the 65th Mechanized Brigade and 128th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces with armored vehicles arrived. And so this is in the Tavria region, and then another 10th AK was deployed to Orikhiv. So Tavia, where is Tavia? I'm not sure. Maybe it's Tarivske, probably somewhere here. So anyway, it's in the rear position, but this actually also shows that the Ukrainians are going to continue their attack down this position south of Orikhiv towards Robotyne. They are not going to give up anytime soon. Over at the Huliaipole sector, we have an interesting report from the Russian Defense Ministry reporting that they disrupted some recon forces from the Ukrainian side near Novoselivka, in the Zaporizhzhia region. And this location is actually here, Novoselivka. And this is not close to the front line. So I suspect that the front line might actually be something like this, with the Ukrainians actually pushing south. But because there is not enough clarification in terms of the front line around here, so I'm not sure if this is accurate, but we shall continue to monitor and see how this goes. And over at the Velika Novosilka sector, the usual continues with the Ukrainians fighting reported at Prione, with the Ukrainians pushing. This Deep State UA's report about this did not mention who is attacking, but I'm assuming that this is the Ukrainians, because the Russians are usually not attacking. And if the Russians are attacking, I think they will be mentioning it. And over at Uruzhaine, the Ukrainians continue the attack. According to the information from multiple sources, Russian Defense Ministry reported that they defended against an assault. And then Deep State UA mentioned about the fighting over here. Ryba reported that the Ukrainian forces attacked the Russian positions near Uruzhaine. So most likely it's coming from the north and probably at the northeast. That's all. There's no fighting reported over at Staromayoske. So as per I have expected, the Ukrainians still have not have very strong control over this area here, because if not, it would have made more sense that the Ukrainians would be continue to be pushing around this area here. So likely they are still haven't have a very strong control of Staromayoske just yet. And that's all from the Zaporizhzhia front. And moving into the Donetsk front, we have nothing over at the Volodya region. We have continued the traditional fighting over at Marinka. This time around, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry mentioned the Russians are on the offensive over at Marinka. And further up north, we have nothing over at Krasnohorivka. And moving into the Adievka front, the only thing that was mentioned is fighting reported from Kruta Balka. According to Deep State UA, they mentioned that the Russians are attacking from Kruta Balka. Kruta Balka is here, and they are attacking westward towards Adievka. The fighting is being reported by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry as well, but they did not mention exactly from which direction. But since Deep State UA mentioned Kruta Balka, this likely to be corroborating the information of the Russian attack. And that's all from the Adievka front. Over at the New York front, we have fighting reported near Druzhba. This is near Mayos, which is at the very end of the Bakhmut front, where the Ukrainian Defense Ministry mentioned about the Russians' offensive operation near Druzhba. And so most likely it's just the Russians trying to reclaim this region here along the canal, because this become a very disturbing salient for the Ukrainians, for the Russians, because the Ukrainians can anytime take over Mayos if the Russians are not careful and create a strategic problem for the Russians to handle. Over at the Bakhmut front, this is Bakhmut city. As you can see, all the icons here as there was plotted while we were monitoring the Battle of Bakhmut. The Russian forces is on the counter-offensive over at Kurdyomivka, and reported by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry as well as at Andriivka in the same report. The one at Andriivka was also corroborated by Ryba, the pro-Russian source, mentioning that the epicenter of the fighting currently is now at Andriivka, where the Ukrainian forces uses tank and armored vehicles to attack, but did not work out. So this actually, probably I should put this as a separate icon, because this is actually a Ukrainian attack. Let me plot it now. Fighting reported at Andriivka. So this is 7, 8. Yeah. So with the blue icon and fighting. Yeah. So this is important because yeah. So we can actually see that the Ukrainians are actually attacking while the Russians are also reportedly being attacking as well. So for the Ukrainians, Andriivka is actually strategically very useful, because capturing this will also allow them to go to the rear of Klishevka and Kupiansk, head to Odralivka, cut off the road. So it is actually very useful for the Ukrainians to actually capture, should they be able to do this. And the Ukrainians are also on the offensive in the north of Klishevka. According to SITREP maps, the Ukrainians managed to make some small progress around this area here, just off the forest, and they managed to control part of the road in the north of Klishevka. So the information coming from SITREP maps. And Deep State UA simply mentioned about fighting along Klishevka all the way to Kupiansk. Otherwise, there is nothing else over here in the southern flank of the Bakhmut front. In the northern flank, fighting have resumed and continued. And fighting is reported around the Bakhivka Yakhine region, with the Ukrainians trying to break through with small forces, probably infantry forces, as they found that this is actually extremely useful. So the fighting continues over at this Bakhivka Yakhine region. And over along the highway near Orikovo-Vasilivka, the Ukrainians continue, retry again to fight down the highway between Zeleniansky and Orikovo-Vasilivka. And according to information from Ryba, the pro-Russian source reported that several assault groups on 9 armored vehicles of various types roll from the direction of Orikovo-Vasilivka and the highway to Slavyansk. And they were intercepted by Russian attack helicopters, and this caused the Ukrainians to withdraw. And this is an engagement that is pretty interesting. So that's all from the Bakhmut front. Moving into the Siversk front. At the Siversk front, we have fighting reported at Bilohorivka. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, the Yoke group of forces reported that they have repelled the 81st Aero Mobile Brigade near Bilohorivka, which is probably airborne. And so there's this attack here. And we have nothing else over at the Siversk front. This is Siversk city. Moving into the Kreminna front. This is Kreminna. At the Kreminna front, the Ukrainians continue their offensive in the Zaporizhzhia forestry, as per reported by the Center Group of Forces. They reported that they have repelled Ukrainian attack by mechanized brigade. And so that's within the Zaporizhzhia forestry. And the reports of fighting at Toske as well is being reported. According to Center Group of Forces, they say that this is actually the same report. So the Ukrainians are attacking, in this way. So far, no success just yet. And that's all from the Kreminna front. Moving into the Svatove front. This is Svatove. At the Svatove front, the Russian forces are on the offensive. Probably is on the offensive. Deep State UA reported that there is fighting at Novoyehorivka, which is allegedly under Ukrainian control. The Russians are attacking. The Ukrainians are holding the lines within Novoyehorivka, or maybe the Russians have partial control, and this is actually a gray zone. We are not sure, and this is the situation here. It's a bit of a vagueness over there. In the northern flank of the Svatove front, a lot of fighting is being reported around here. There is fighting reported near Stemakivka. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, they reported that the Ukrainian mechanized brigades 14, 32, and 67 were repelled near Sinkovka, Novosibirsk, and Stemakovka. So I believe it's not sure which is the one fighting in which region, but the Ukrainians are attacking around the Stemakivka region. However, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry reported that the Russians are fighting offensive operations south of Novosibirsk. This is Novosibirsk, and the Russians are attacking south of it. This location is captured by the Russian forces, and they are currently holding a position away with a buffer zone. And this is actually acknowledged by Deep State UA, the pro-Ukrainian source. They say that the Russian forces have managed to capture virtually the entire of Novosibirsk. So either it's completely or it's virtually. I'm not sure. It's like they don't want to just outright say that it's captured, but they say it's virtually, completely. So is it virtually or is it completely? Because virtually is you haven't captured completely, but completely means totally is captured. So virtually completely is actually oxymoron. But whatever it is, the Russian Defense Ministry reported that they repelled Ukrainian forces that was attacking near Novosibirsk. This is a counter attack by the Ukrainians, and so far it did not work out. The Russian lines managed to hold to protect Novosibirsk. So that's all from the Svatove front. This is Svatove. And moving into the Kupiansk front. This is Kupiansk. At the Kupiansk front, the Russian forces continue their massive Kupiansk offensive across the entire front line. And this goes all the way from Liman Pershi all the way to Vershana, Pershashtreneve, and Ulyansky region. And over at this north of Ivanivska, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry reported that they repelled an attack north of Ivanivska, which is actually just here. Ivanivska is just off Timkovka, which is actually here. This is Timkovka, Ivanivka, and further up north, this is Pershashtreneve, which another attack is actually happening. This pushing south, and this fighting reported along the Pershashtreneve is reported by SITREP maps as well as the Russian Defense Ministry. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, they mentioned that this entire front line is 11 kilometers long, and they managed to progress more than 3 kilometers deep. And the length of 11 kilometers, I can show you, is probably around like this. So this 11 kilometers, and they managed to move 3 kilometers deep, probably around here, or maybe they have went deeper. We are not sure because the front line is very unclear. According to SITREP maps, the Russian lines was actually here. So which is why for them the new line, according to SITREP maps, actually corroborates with our current mapping. But that's his mapping. This is my mapping. So we shall see how this goes. The fighting is also reported at Vershana, as per the same report. And then Deep State UA also mentioned about the fighting at Vershana. The Zapad group of forces reported that the Ukrainians did try to counterattack in the Vershana region, however did not work out. So the Russians actually are slowly pushing. The lines are now more established. This is more of a confirmed line. And the Deep State UA's mapping has been reflected on the blue mapping here, which actually is much more further away from Vershana and Pershashtreneve, which does reflect the success of the Russian forces, if the Ukrainians actually have to fall back against this line. Deep State UA actually mentioned some story about how the Russians are throwing themselves, disregarding their life to capture the ground, saying that these are Z forces, and yeah, maybe. But I originally wanted to copy and paste it, but then I realized that it's a bit tinted, it's a bit of a propagandic feeling, so I decided not to paste it into the source. Over at the Sinkivka region, the Russians are also fighting in this area, according to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, and the Russian Defense Ministry mentioned that the Ukrainians did try to counterattack. So in not just Vershana that the Russians are actually making the push south, but also at Sinkivka, the Russians are attacking to try to capture Sinkivka. The Ukrainians are quickly trying to block this attack by the Russians, and apparently they are being outnumbered by the Russians tentatively. So the Ukrainians will be on the back foot. The Russians will be making the progress. And according to information from Ryba, the pro-Russian source reported that the Russian forces continue to make positional offensive in the area of Liman Pershi and are able to push the Ukrainians out. So while this just a positional battle, because positional battle involve a lot of artillery and shelling and sniping, and the Ukrainian forces actually got pushed back by this positional fighting. So it does reflect that the Ukrainians are lacking forces, because usually you do not retreat from a positional fighting. You are able to grind on, but it looks like they got overpowered by firepower that actually caused a redraw from a positional fighting. But of course, this is pro-Russian source, so take it with a pinch of salt. And that's all from the Kupiansk front. And there's nothing over at the Kharkiv front, nothing at the border region. And so this is the summary for the day of 530 for the 7th of August. Just some conclusion. I think the Ukrainians are making good progress over at Robotyne. Although I still do not agree upon why they choose this spot, because there's just way too many lines here. But the Ukrainians are making some progress. They are slowly grinding on, and I think that the night attack followed by the morning attack by a different force seems like a really good idea. And the Russians will have to rotate faster, or they will have to reinforce as soon as maybe a few hours after the first attack was reported, to keep the troop fresh. I'm not sure how the Russians are going to do it, because the Ukrainians might be monitoring through drones and whatever, and sending artillery to disrupt rotations. So I'm not sure how the Russians are going to deal with it, but this is a good new tactic by the Ukrainian forces. And a reinforcement continue to be reported means that the Ukrainians are not going to give up. They are going to continue to push Robotine and break the line. But whether the line after they can capture Robotine, further south, will there be a continued strong defense by the Russian side is kind of unclear. Maybe to the Ukrainians, this is the only line, and after they can break through this only line, they can actually break through the rest very quickly. Maybe that's how the Ukrainians see it, which we cannot see because they have intelligence we do not have. So maybe that's the case. Otherwise, Ukrainians are running pretty out of idea about how to capture this area here, Robotyne and Zaporizhzhia. The Russians are holding them back pretty good. And in terms of the Bakhmut front, the Ukrainian forces are trying to push further south as Klishchiivka, getting a bit hard. But the Russians are also doing their counter-offensive. So it looks like the Ukrainians will start to struggle a lot more over the Bakhmut, which is why probably they are restarting an attack in the north to draw the Russians up and away from the southern flank. That might be what they are trying to do, to diversionary. And the Russians are definitely not doing much here around the Kupiansk region. However, the Ukrainians are desperate to try to recapture Novoselivsk, and which is probably why we are seeing this fighting around here. The Russians are not pushing as usual. Once they make some capture, they will just entrench. They will not push out further. So the only main thing they are looking at is the Kupiansk front, where the Russians are making this massive push. I'm not sure when they will stop, because the Russian forces always tend to give up after 1 week. They will never reach 1 week, almost a week they will stop their offensive. So let's see how this goes. Will the Russians continue to push all the way to the main road and capture Petropavlivka? I'm not sure if they will do that, but let's see how this goes. Anyway, this is the summary, and I'll see you. Do press the like button and subscribe if you're new to this channel, and I'll see you in the next update.